Hello GCSE students, this is the analysis video of Marley's Ghost. The reading has already been done, please listen to that carefully. In this one we're going to go through what it means. So we are over halfway through Stave One and we've had the clanking chains, the ringing of the bells, Marley on the door knocker, and here in this particular video we've got the meeting and the conversation between Scrooge and his former partner, Marley. What do we have? The same vase, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtail and his coat skirts and the hair upon his head. The easiest way to show you this is to look at some images of Marley. And perhaps the most important word there was that of the word bristling. Because what we have here, and I like this particular image better than most. Oh, it even moves. How exciting. This is from the Jim Carrey version of the film, which was animated. But we have the sense of his hair standing up on end, a terrifying appearance, covered in chains. And these chains will become significant. We'll look at those in a little bit more detail. But to be bristling is to have your hair standing up on end. The point being that he looks the way that Scrooge always remembered him and remembers him. He's wearing the same clothes. The chain, however, most important thing of all, was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses, wrought in steel. These are the items that Marley was interested in his life, and as a consequence his chain is made of those items too, but they are not a blessing but a curse. As we move on to the next line, Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. I'm going to make a point of showing you here the tricks of the trade, and the trick of the trade is you just look it up like anybody else would. Teachers typically would do this before the lesson and ensure that they know what they're saying is accurate and correct. Well, in this time of lockdown, necessarily you will have to do some of that legwork yourself, videos like this notwithstanding, and go look it up. So here's an example. Already done the searching. Have a read. The important detail being bowels of compassion. So from the King James Bible, but whoso hath this world's good, and seeth his brother hath need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? So if you see your brothers in need and you shut up your bowels, if you shut up your care and regard for others, how can God live within you? And in the previous video I spoke of Cain and Abel and the famous line, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And here we have a further continuation of this idea that it is all of our responsibility to ensure that all of our brothers and sisters in this world are cared for, and that we have compassion for them. So Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no compassion, but he never believed it until now. Again, we have this mixture of the supernatural and the ever so slightly comic. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but now as a ghost, he really does not have any bowels. Ha ha ha. As we move on, Scrooge is most concerned with how it affects him. What do you want with me? Why are you here? Who are you? Ask me who I was. Who were you then? Now Scrooge must have a fairly strong idea as to who this is, but as a rational human being, not given to flights of fancy, he still asks the question. And then it was revealed, in life I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? Yes. Do it then. Scrooge here is still rather assertive, isn't he? Although he was incredibly fearful, and is incredibly fearful, it doesn't come naturally to him to be deferential, and that's why we still have these imperative verbs. Sit down. Do it then. It's not you may want to. Would you like to sit down? Perhaps you could. It's do it then. Can you sit down? Do it. So he's still looking to take charge. At the same time as being uncertain. He asks the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so see-through, so transparent, would be able to sit down or not. And he felt that if it were impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. So we've got Scrooge here thinking rather carefully about not causing offence. And that's an example of his fear. That, yes, I've said he is assertive, but at the same time he doesn't want to cause any undue distress to the ghost. I suppose it wouldn't be wise to upset a ghost, would it? Now, as we move on, Marley says that you don't believe in him, and Scrooge explains why. Some rather famous lines here. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. Scrooge puts this down to, maybe he's had a bad meal. So again, he's not looking to see the truth. He is instead seeking to find excuses and to explain away why he is seeing these things. Rather than being supernatural, ghostly visitations over which he has no control, Scrooge prefers to see it as an hallucination. And he even tries to tell a joke. There's more of gravy than of grave about you. Ha ha! Or not. And the reason I say or not is because this one isn't funny. And I don't think we're supposed to laugh at it. This is an example of Scrooge's misplaced desire to retain control. I think. People make jokes when they feel uncomfortable as well. It's easier to laugh at something than it is to express how fearful you actually are. And for Scrooge to express how fearful he actually is would be to reveal weakness. And that just won't do, of course. The narrator tells us this. He tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping his terror down. Because he's terrified. Yeah. The spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. So just in case it wasn't clear how fearful he is, the marrow in his bones is disturbed. Right. As we move on, we're just going to pick up on some interesting words more than anything, because most of it I think is reasonably straightforward. The ghost is described as having an infernal atmosphere. An inferno would be a sort of like a fiery mess, I suppose. Infernal is relating to the underworld, relating to hell. And so Marley is described as having an atmosphere of hell with it and with him. And evidently that's going to make Scrooge feel terrified. He says, however, that he could eat a toothpick and that would make it feel quite real. If I swallow the toothpick, he could spend the rest of his days persecuted by a legion of goblins, all of my own creation. So again, he's disbelieving. He doesn't want to believe, he chooses not to believe. And at this stage I'm going to use the word agency. Agency is a word which I think encompasses power and choice. Scrooge would like to believe that he has the agency to do as he pleases. He fails to recognise that from the moment of Marley's visitation, he has very little agency. As we move throughout the text, the only choice he will have is whether he is going to change into a better man, for if he does not change, then the consequences are likely to be his death, is likely to be his death. At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry. "Ah!" And in the reading, I would always do the screaming, even though it's not quite there in the text itself, because I think it captures Marley's anger at Scrooge and his own fear, Marley's own fear, at what he is hearing. If Scrooge doesn't change, then he will be condemned to live the life that Marley does. So Marley gives out a cry, shakes his chain, and Scrooge is forced to hold on tight to his chair to save himself from fainting, falling in a swoon. But then we have Marley removing the bandage from round its head and its lower jaw dropped upon its breast. Now, depending on if you've seen a film version of this, in some film versions, Marley's jaw dropping from the rest of his head and falling basically down to his, the centre of one's chest, it can be quite funny. And in other films, it's terrifying. So it depends on how a director seeks to do that. In the text, I think fear is what Scrooge is supposed to take from it and what we're supposed to see. And we know this because Scrooge falls prostrate. He falls upon his knees. Why does someone fall upon their knees? Fear, prayer, surrender. I think for Scrooge, all of those three words probably play a role. Fear, prayer, surrender, and perhaps last of all, mercy. He wants mercy, forgiveness. Forgive me. Now as we move on, Scrooge is on a sort of little information gathering mission. Scrooge says he believes in him because that's the sensible thing to say, I think. But his information gathering is why are you doing this? Why are you coming to me? And here we have a key section. It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. What does it mean? Live kindly, live generously, live freely, share your wealth, share your love with others while you are living. Travel doesn't mean go to Australia, it means give generously of yourself and your time and your resources if you have them, because if you don't, then you're condemned to do it in death. And this has a rather strong, a rather overt Christian message. In the Bible, the story, Jesus tells his disciples that those who are first in the kingdom on earth will be last in the kingdom of heaven, and those who are last on earth will be first in the kingdom of heaven. The message to his disciples being that it's not really about your material wealth, it's about how you give and love others, so that everyone can live happily, and so that everyone can live fortunately. Marley is saying here that he has not heeded that message, and that's why we have this interruption of, oh, woe is me, because Marley here is pitying himself. And as I read it there again, I skipped over, oh, woe is me, mainly because I just wanted to reinforce it now. It's the one interjection in what is otherwise a rather straightforward answer to a question. Why do spirits walk the earth? Because they didn't do it in life. Oh, woe is me is his self-pitying proclamation that he wishes he had heeded the message of generosity and compassion while he was living. And of course that's why he's visiting Scrooge in the first place. That's why he's here, to encourage Scrooge to not make the same mistakes. Scrooge asks, why are you fettered? Why are you chained? Why are you tied up? Why are you entangled? I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, yard by yard. I girded it on, I attached it to myself freely, and I wore it freely. I made choices. I had agency, power, and choice. And the choices and the power I had, I misused. Now I'm pausing there because I think we're supposed to view that we, the reader, are also supposed to take on board that message. Scrooge is, he's fictional. Of course he is. He's not real. And he's being used as a conduit, a construct. Scrooge is a vehicle, a mechanism to display this message. Live with others, live with compassion, live generously, give generously, and use your power and your choice, the agency you have, to ensure that you don't end up in the circumstance that Marley is in. Now, the circumstance that Marley is in, I'm going to give you some sort of separate work on. Some people will say that Marley is in limbo. He's in a sort of the hinterland between heaven and hell. Sometimes limbo might be referred to as purgatory. The only issue I have with that interpretation, that Marley is in this hinterland between heaven and hell, is that in limbo or in purgatory, in Christian sort of theology, the idea was that you would be in purgatory until you learned your lesson, really, and then you would be eventually allowed to pass on to heaven once you'd learned that. And Marley has made it pretty clear that for him that will not be the case. The word that I had identified earlier as being useful, infernal, I think accentuates and reinforces the idea that Marley won't be going to heaven anytime soon. His suffering now is very much eternal, and the infernal atmosphere that he carries with him, the atmosphere of hell or the underworld, rather implies that, if anything, if there were any transition to be made, it would be to hell. So Marley, not in purgatory, not really in limbo, he's just stuck. And according to Dante, I believe that puts him in the fourth circle of hell. And as I say, I'm going to provide some resources to you which will provide a little bit more context for that particular remark. It's not hugely important. It's perhaps the kind of detail which would be a nice touch, but maybe not the kind of thing that you're going to need to write about terribly often. That's not to say that there's no value in knowing it. I think there is some value. Why not? And then as we move on, Marley says to Scrooge that the chain that he wears and the chain that he will bear will be at least as long as Marley's, because it was at least as long as Marley's 7 Christmas Eves ago when Marley died. Scrooge then begs. To implore is to beg. Speak comfort to me. Tell me something good. Say nice things. Make me feel better. As the reader, I think we're supposed to, I don't know, I always find that slightly irritating. Here is a man who is a stranger to his fellow people on the earth, asking somebody else to be nice to him. And yet in the beginning of the text we were told that he liked to edge his way along the crowded paths of life. There is a bitter irony in Scrooge asking for kindness. It's not to say he shouldn't get any, but speak comfort to me, I don't know. Irritating. Marley, of course, doesn't have any to give, and he says that it comes from other regions, by other ministers to other kinds of men. And I think this is an allusion here to religion, to Christianity specifically. If you want comfort, go to the religious, go to the clergy, and even then the clergy and the religious will likely have comfort to speak to different types of men to you, because those who are first on this earth will be last in the kingdom of heaven, and those who are last on this earth will be first in the kingdom of heaven. Marley confirms what I was saying earlier about him likely to be stuck in this place forever, because he says, I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger. He's rather stuck. Scrooge then puts his hands in his trousers and thinks, he ponders. And after his pondering, he says some interesting things. Let's put it that way. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob. It's rather like Scrooge has not been listening at all to what Marley has been telling him. Scrooge has rather taken what Marley has said in the wrong manner, and the inference appears to be that Scrooge thinks that there must have been a task, and that when the task has been completed, then you get to move on from that task, and therefore he has been very slow about it. And as explained previously, there was nothing to be slow about, because Marley has been condemned to this for the rest of his time, so far as time exists, of course. Marley says no rest, no peace, and instead he is tortured incessantly, constantly, by remorse. That's a fascinating phrase. Marley is being tortured by remorse. Remorse is feeling sorry, and Marley feels sorry all the time, and his feeling of constant sorrow is a form of torture. Really fascinating phrase. Now, as we move on, again, Marley says that he is captive, bound, and double-ironed. So captive, imprisoned, bound, the chains are wrapped around him. Double-ironed, his chain is wrapped around him twice. It's gone around him a few times. Not to know that ages of incessant labour by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. So he's saying there that he must work constantly. Labour, work, to work, incessant, constant. And he says that the earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed, meaning he's stuck. So I'm going to keep just reinforcing that. The earth must continue for eternity before he's going to stop. So therefore there's no escape for him. He carries on. Not to know that any Christian spirit, working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. He's saying that when he was alive, he didn't know that any amount of regret could make up for the fact that he's not lived his life properly. He says, yet such was I. I was that man who didn't know that I could regret as much as I possibly could, but regret wasn't good enough. Regret wasn't going to change anything. So he's effectively saying here, and the language in this paragraph is a little bit more challenging than in some of the rest of the text, that it's too late for him. While he was living, he didn't live his life in a Christian way, perhaps. And as a consequence of not living his life properly, inverted commas, properly, there's no escape for him. We know that Scrooge also doesn't understand because he begins to apply it to himself on the right hand side of that highlighted section. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob. You were always good at your business. You were always good at your work, Scrooge says. And as the reader, we're supposed to go, God, what an idiot. What a fool. He really doesn't understand. And Marley makes the same point. Scrooge doesn't understand. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business, how other people were living. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. My work, what I did for a living was but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Who cares about, the counting house? It's meaningless in comparison to my business, which was charity. What does charity mean? It means kindness towards others, giving, mercy, forgiveness, forbearance, tolerance, patience, benevolence, goodness. Those were his business. He carries on. At this time of the rolling year, at Christmas, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down? Ding, 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 ding. Who does this sound like? It's Scrooge from the beginning of the text. And never raised them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode. He spent his life looking down at the ground, avoiding eye contact with other people, because if you look at people, then they will ask something of you, perhaps, he seems to think. They'll want your stuff. And he says that what he should have done was look up to the stars, particularly and specifically the star that guided the wise men to Jesus' abode when he was born. Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Now the three wise men were also three wealthy men. They came and brought gifts, didn't they? Gold, frankincense and myrrh. Marley is also a wealthy man, and he says, were there no poor homes to which its light might have conducted me? Was there no star in the sky that could have told me, a wealthy man, where the poor lived, so that I could give gifts, so that I could give generously, so that I could share my wealth with those who needed it? Scrooge begins to quake exceedingly. He begins to shake and tremble. Hear me, my time is nearly gone. Scrooge says he will. I will hear you. I will sort of pay attention to what you've said. But don't be hard upon me. I'm laughing because, he says I'll listen, but he hasn't really listened. Oh, don't be mean to me. Don't. Please. Pray. Please. Pray means please. Marley then continues to say, I've sat next to you, for many a night, so I don't know why I happen to be here tonight. Scrooge is rather alarmed by that, and he wipes the sweat from his brow, the perspiration, and Marley's ghost carries on. That is no light part of my penance. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my procuring. To procure is to get. Marley is saying that he has got Scrooge the chance to avoid his fate, to escape the fate that Marley has. Scrooge says, thanks. You're always a good friend, thanks. I don't know, maybe it's not funny, but it always makes me laugh. Oh, thanks, friend. I think I'm laughing because Scrooge had said that he hadn't given the narration had said that Scrooge hadn't given Marley another thought since earlier that morning. Such a great friend that even on the day of his death, 7 years previously, not a huge amount of thought has been given to that friend. Strikes me as so therefore this line strikes me as something of a lie. But there we are. Not hugely surprising. And then how does the scene end? He says that you'll be visited by 3 ghosts. Scrooge is like, oh, really? I don't like the ghosts. I don't want the ghosts. I think I'd rather not. And couldn't I take them all at once? Oh, God, what hassle! Scrooge appears to be suggesting. Yeah, so the 3 ghosts will arrive, and then the end of the scene. What does the end of the scene contain? Well, Marley shows Scrooge all the other ghosts, all the other people who have the same fate as he, who are condemned to a life of, it's not a life, is it, but to a ghostly existence of seeing people in need of help and not being able to help them. So the window is opened. Scrooge goes to the window in this section here, and Scrooge hears confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret. To lament is to feel sorrow. We're over here now. He hears wailings. Ah! To wail is to cry. He hears crying inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. So the ghosts that Scrooge is seeing, they're telling themselves off. They're chastising themselves. And then Marley joins in. The spectre being another word for a ghost, of course, listens for a moment, then joins in the mournful dirge. A dirge is a sort of dull, droning, repetitive sound. And then he flows out into the night as well. Scrooge looks out the window, and what does he see? The air is filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in their restless haste, moaning as they went, each of them with chains. Some of them might be guilty governments. Dickens making a little joke there about corrupt politicians who didn't help the people when they needed the help. Perhaps Dickens was writing in a time of corrupt government. I couldn't possibly comment about how that applies to today. Maybe more significantly, Scrooge knows who many of the ghosts are, and the last line of this particular video. The misery with them all was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good. They sought to help in human matters and had lost the power forever. Scrooge must learn from the visitation of Marley. If he doesn't, then he too will be condemned to the same existence with Marley, as a spirit who travels on the wings of the wind for eternity, wrapped up in a chain that he made over the course of his life. But we know that Scrooge's chain will be even more horrendous, even heavier, even more of a burden than Marley's chain. And so, if this were not enough to cause Scrooge to change, then it would be hard to imagine what would be enough. That being said, we know that the 3 visits to come, the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Ghost of Christmas Present, and the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, are necessary to make that change possible. Whether these creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, he couldn't tell, but they faded together. And the last moment here, Scrooge closed the window and examined the door, and the door was still double locked. So, at the beginning of the stave, or in the middle of the stave, when Scrooge returns home, he makes a show of double locking the door. He's not scared, of course. I mean, he wouldn't be scared, but he does double lock the door, which he doesn't usually do, and it's still double locked. So the supernatural element of the story is again reinforced, accentuated, those 2 words that I repeat a lot, because once a theme is established, writers generally will repeat them and make more of them, and to reinforce and to accentuate does a nice job of capturing that, I feel. Most significantly though, Scrooge, he tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. Ha! And what does he do? He goes to sleep. And that's it. That is the end of Stave One. I will be creating more content, more videos for the rest of the text. Hopefully you're finding them useful as a kind of replacement for teaching. And from here on, the best thing to do is, if you're ever unsure of something, please ask questions, send me an email. If there are more videos that you want, then please let me know. We're going to try and make attempts to ensure that in this time of lockdown, you get some reasonable quality teaching or something like it, with the added benefit that by being on YouTube, it should be possible for you to go back and use these as a revision resource as well. All right, that's it. Thanks very much. Keep well, stay safe. Bye.